The Mystery of BELICENA VILLCA. Fourth Book. The Story of Kurt von Superman. Chapter 1. The turbulent waters ran and dragged me, incapable to avoid it. Nearby, involved in a roar of noise and foam, the cascade absorbed torrents of water like a titanic thirsty throat. I was approaching to the roaring abyss. I saw the edge, trying to swim vainly, but the water was dragging me. And finally I was falling headlong in the torrent. It was the end. I would crash forth at the bottom, against sharpened rocks. I needed to open my eyes. Doing a supreme effort, I opened my eyes, and they were instantly wounded by a terrible blaze. I was blinking, trying to accustom the sight to the sun. Meanwhile I comprehended that I was lying in an unknown room. I was looking as hypnotized. The window, adorned with white curtains, while little by little the mist went dissipated in which my consciousness was involved. The first that I assumed was the intense headache, and a kind of pressure over the scalp and brow. I tried to take my hands to the head, and a new pain jabbed my nervous system. I almost cannot move my arms, which were both bandaged till the elbows. The left one was the most affected and sensitive, because any little movement seemed a martyrdom. The right arm, likewise pained, seemed to be in better conditions. With this last, I warned that a bandage covered my entire skull until the brow. The movement was very painful, realized by reflected recovering the consciousness. Nevertheless its fugacity, it resulted enough to alert the person, who was seated at the right of the bed, in such angle that it avoided me to perceive his presence since the first moment. Was an enormous man, of severe gaze, and thunderous voice, who was approaching to me with a gesture of preoccupation, and vociferating. Older than I remembered, from such nights of my childhood, however, he had not changed too much. Undoubtedly my Uncle Kurt. His countenance was dejected, and his voice painful, saying incoherences. "You are my unique nephew, and I almost killed you. I've shed my own blood. A curse has fallen upon me. Oh God, my end is near. Why do you act this disgrace to my sufferings? You'll find Echiro, my son," continued Kurt with plaintive voice, "you'll be fine. The Ampage Palacios has revised you, and he assures that soon you'll be recovered. How could you forgive me, creature?" Uncle Kurt continued gibbering his complaints and apologies steadily while he maintained that powerful blue gaze nailed on me. Involved in a growing drowse, doing efforts to coordinate the ideas, I recognized in the tense countenance of my interlocutor the known features of my mother. As astonished, I was looking at him steadily seeking for something to say, when I heard clearly the canine sound of a growl. It reached to my ears, coming from outside of the house, and it had the virtue to achieve that the remembrances be crowding in my mind. The last thing I saw when I explored the ranch of Uncle Kurt, made present as an overwhelming avalanche. What were they? I babbled, trying to contain the tremor that seized my entire body. In the countenance of Uncle Kurt a question went painted. "How?" he asked disconcerted. "The beasts," I said doing an effort, because I felt the tongue swollen and asleep. "Oh, the dogs," noticed Uncle Kurt. "They are dogs from the Tibet. Very particular animals, authentic dogs. Perhaps the only species that deserves that name. They are extraordinary animals, capable to receive a semi-human training." Involuntarily, I opened the eyes horrorized, and Uncle Kurt at noticing it he apologized afflicted. "What has happened with you is an accident. An incomprehensible accident from which I'm guilty. The dogs attacked you, because I ordered it. Oh God, only I'm responsible of the greatest crime. I've shed my own blood." Uncle Kurt began to repeat the previous incoherences, while I was falling in the unconsciousness. My eyes were going shuttered, to whom had came to visit with great illusion, transformed in a personage of a Greek tragedy, for my imprudence and improvidence. Suddenly, I felt guilty as well. My heart went tightened. I tried to say some apology, but a save-up number eclipsed my consciousness, submerging me in a deep dream. I'll try to abbreviate the details of my unfortunate intromission in the life of Uncle Kurt. It'll be a concession in favor of other things that I want to put at the reader's disposition, for the better interpretation of this strange story. Because, if someone had the idea that all what occurred to me until then was more than enough to cover a quota of mysterious events, I'll tell that you're wrong for long. To this adventure were missing many important things. I'd say that it was just starting, and if the notable causalities had chased me up to there, what would come next was knocked in the rear. Because Uncle Kurt had a story to tell. So offbeat and strange that considered itself results unbelievable, but that I had to take with great respect, because that story was part of my own story. But don't get us ahead. The day in which I opened the eyes, and I saw Uncle Kurt for second time in my life, was the next to the night of my unfortunate incursion through the ranch. Since some 15 hours, that I remained unconscious before the expectation of Uncle Kurt, who feared to have produced me a grave cerebral lesion. The strike, struck by the butt of a pistol Lucia, had been devastating and, according to Uncle Kurt, had to give thanks for the salvation of the abnormal hardness of the skull, or to a miracle. Why this security? Because he had beaten me strongly. According to his words, the enough was to kill the intruder. This violence was due to Uncle Kurt was expecting an attack from one moment to another. He had motives to believe it, as will be seen, and to the bad fortune, or another cause, he wanted for me to have the ill-fated idea to realize the suspicious nocturnal visit. In a first moment, after be sure that there were no more intruders, Uncle Kurt dragged me to the house and checked my pockets searching for weapons and identity elements. With the surprise that is to be supposed, he found the Iron Cross's medal, the letter of my mother and the documents, and licenses that properly proved my identity. According to Uncle Kurt, he'd have committed suicide right there, if it was not for that I was inexplicably breathing. His first reaction was to seek for help, but, conscious about the irregular of the situation, he decided to be extremely cautious with the finality to avoid the police intervention. For that purpose, would result inconvenient to call an unknown doctor, who could put him in trouble. I must clarify that Uncle Kurt had not married, so he lived alone in a hall, assisted by a marriage of old and loyal Indians, who lived in a small contiguous house. Apart from the aforementioned couple never dwelt there less than 10 peons, to attend vines and the small factory of sweetmeat syrup, but these didn't occupy the gully that was 30 meters away from the hall, and were not worthy of confidence. Uncle Kurt called desperate to the old majordomo, named Jose Teberba, hitting the window of his room. "Pepper, Pepper." "Yes, Don Sereno," replied the old man with promptitude. "Come quickly, Pepper." "A disgrace has occurred," screamed Kurt. Even though he just mentioned the old man, 5 minutes later appeared Pepper and his wife, because by tone of the call, they supposed that something grave was happening. The old one crossed herself constantly while Uncle Kurt and Pepper moved my exanimate body to a sofa of the living room, because the bedrooms were in the superior floor. I lost a few blood through a profound gash at the height of the exit part, but the most impressive was undoubtedly the manner in which the docs destroyed my forearms. Uncle Kurt left the old couple to clean the wounds and take care of me, and he went in search of the Ampage Palacios. He removed a brand new Jeep Toyota from the garage, acquired in times of the sweet money, and he left rapidly, noticing when leaving the presence of the Ford, a few meters from the gate. The hour was untimely to seek for any medic, but for the Ampage Palacios. This personage, fictitious, but he deserved to be, is a world-famous Indian medic for his dominion on the physiotherapy. Old already in those years, he still's attending his humble consulting room, without being bothered by anyone, because his prestige is so big as the fortune that he amassed, thanks to the gifts that generous and wealthy patients went depositing in his hands. The Ampage Palacios has achieved to make walk men and women paralyzed for years. He has achieved to move necks as tense as an obelisk, and he has straightened many gone vertebral columns by therapies to form the whole world that would result difficult to believe, if it's not for the signature book to prove it. These books are the second touristic cause of Santa Maria, because there are signs and notes of the people from all around the world who reach to the Ampage Palacios, searching for a hope. Poor and rich, priests and doctors, noble and commoners, all have signed his books to give testimony for the wisdom of the Ampage. Here is no magic, nor sorcery, but pure and simple ancient wisdom that dynasties of Digutas Ampage have conserved and transmitted from father to sons. Today the sons of Ampage Palacios are graduate medics at the University of Salta and specialized in rheumatology. Following thus the familiar tradition and practicing with success a knowledge thousands of years older than the materialistic science of Occident. Uncle Kurt came back a half of an hour later accompanied by Ampage Palacios. He, who is a corpulent old man of thick and white mustache, and hands as big as an espadrille number 12, started to check my head and arms. The head is not broken, affirmed the Ampage, 10 minutes later, but it'll be necessary to wait a few hours to know if there's a brain damage. The left arm is broken, it has to be plastered. The right arm has the bone fine, but the flesh is much damaged. Look, Sereno, continued the Ampage, I think that he's grave, but his head and arm have to be stitched, and give him anti-inflammatories and antibiotics. It is too much for me, who only repair bones. I'll send you the young man, who has come to visit us. He is doctor and he will attend you better. 1 hour later, came Dr. Palacios, grumbling, because he had to travel to Salta at the 5 hours, and he was awakened at 1 hour. He surrendered himself completely to the task, applying several injections, stitching the wounds of the right arm, and plastering the left one. He gashed the scalp, after shaving the injured zone, with some hooks of inert plastic. Are you sure that the dogs are not affected with rabies? Asked with distrust the son of the Ampage. I can assure it, affirmed Uncle Kurt horrorized. They bit, because I ordered it. They are very domesticated animals, and obey me blindly. They'd never attack anyone by themselves. The doctor moved his head while he was murmurating something about the doubts that he sheltered in regard to tameness of the dogs of the Tibet. 3 hours later, Dr. Palacios and Uncle Kurt left, after taking the keys that he had in that jacket safari, entered the car in the ranch and he parked it inside the garage. The second day, I tried to get up, because I came to myself in a moment in which there was nobody in the room. I felt, then, a terrible weakness, and such dizziness that I almost fell to the floor. I remained seated in the edge of the bed contemplating, not with certain curiosity, the place in which I was. Was a room soberly furnished, with a bedroom suite of carved walnut, and bed with a lacy mosquito net, which was on the first floor. I deduced it, for the inclined ceiling, and the thick beams of breakaxe that supported it. In that moment entered the old one and she felt frightened to see me seated. Oh mister, said the old woman, how do you do with these things? I need to rest, the doctor ordered that. She was pushing me firmly by the shoulders, forcing me to take the horizontality while I led her, astonished by the attitude of the stranger. Immediately, I was lying in the bed, and covered again while the old woman continued protesting. Mister, you've moved the plastered arm. That's not good. He'll get angry. And, the doctor, I asked shyly. Mr. Sereno. He'll come immediately, responded the old woman, when I tell him that you've recovered. She approached to the door at my right, the other led to a bathroom according to what I knew later, but, before leaving she turned back and said, Stay calm mister, that I'll bring you a soup and orchata of nuts." She smiled. "You'll see soon how you recover your force." As the days passed, I went recovering, and 15 days later, I was going down to the dining room, and I realized walks through the adjacent park of the house. 15 days later, they took away the plaster, and, only at the 35 days after I arrived to Santa Maria, I could leave to Taffy del Vale, in amazing circumstances that I'll narrate later. At the beginning, I wrote many times to my parents, lying about a supposed archaeological investigation in the Pucara di Loma Rica, to reassure them for my prolonged absence. I also spoke with Dr. Kerds, with the purpose to request him a 15-day extension to my vacations that ended in those days, but he only agreed when I told him that I had suffered an accident. Things were getting difficult, because I not started yet to inquire the whereabouts of the son of BELICENA VILLCA, and my vacations were ending. However, when I left from Santa Maria, the morale was high, and I had more faith than ever. To that had contributed the prolonged conferences that I sustained with extraordinary relative. But, let's go back to those days of my convalescence, when Uncle Kurt initiated the narration of his fantastic life.